Hello, if you're seeing this, you're joining us for our PPS 777B Week 3 video tutorial and summary. So thanks for being here. All right, hey, welcome everybody to Week 3 of PPS 777B Methodology course. So I had the opportunity to speak with some of you tonight. Conversations went really well. One of the common themes that kept coming up is people are kind of a little bit nervous about, IRB and getting permission, basically consent forms, things like that. This is one of those things where, I just again want to reiterate, trust the process. Methodology is always going to feel a little awkward because you have never done anything like this before. And this is just a new process for you. So we're taking it in doses, and I'm trying to follow a strict timeline so that we can all do this in a timely manner. One of the things that I want everybody to remember is methodology. Chapter 3 is simply laying out your study. It feels a little awkward again at first because you haven't really done the study yet, but you're talking as if you did. You've never done, this type of work per se. So you're talking with authority even though you feel like kind of lost. But that's all good. I want everybody to get started and start writing. And basically, as you do that, I'm going to guide you. So tonight I had some conversations about interviews and surveys and just kind of narrowing it down. Couple of suggestions I could come up with is basically definitely pick one or the other. A mixed methods study is a great thing. There's a lot of great qualitative data that you can get from that. But I want you to choose one or the other. So really zero in on interview or survey. And in our conversations, I'm going to help you make those decisions. It really depends on the research question. So having said that, we're going to go a little bit into what that's going to take if you decide one or the other, but I want you to decide that. If you find a tool in in a thesis that you're looking for that really matches identically or exactly what you could use, or if there's a tool out there, I can think of examples like grit scale, things like that, that you would want to use in your study. That's always the easiest way to go about it, but it's not always something that you can do. So if you find something out there and you're like, this is exactly what I need, I had one student that basically said that, then that's a jump on everybody else. But there's no problem with designing interview questions or survey questions on your own. It's just got to be done with validity and reliability, and I can help you with that. So tonight we're going to talk about population and sample, and we're going to talk about designing an instrument for you to collect data. We're going to go over the IRB application step by step. My hope is that we can get started on that, and by late next week, we're moving forward and being able to submit that to IRB. But I don't want anybody to stress out too bad on IRB or getting consent forms and things like that, because really we're going to set ourselves up to where once IRB reaches approval for your methodology, for your study, we're going to be ready to go. We're going to collect data pretty quickly. So we'll work on that. And that's what our one-on-one conversations are for, is for us to specifically go over your strategies and meeting your goals in your timeline. So with that, let's go through the study for tonight. And I look forward to finishing the rest of the conversations with everybody the next couple of days. And we're going to schedule some phone interviews for next week. So thanks for joining me tonight, or I should say this morning. You're probably seeing it on Thursday, but let's get started. Quick announcement. We talked about the headers changing. So the very first thing is for your opening paragraph under methodology, I want you to add the heading overview. The next thing that you're going to do is change strategies of inquiry to purpose. So whatever you wrote for strategies of inquiry, the header is now going to read purpose. talked with my colleagues in the FPU, in the counseling program, and we decided on a new set of headers. So we're going to be changing those up a little bit. So I want you to add a header for research question, where you've already written your research question, and this will be a short 1-paragraph explanation of your research question. So those are the first few changes. Change researcher's role heading to research design. And this is where we're going to add to this section this week for your homework. So these are some of the categories that we're going to be working on. These are what the headings have changed to. So as far as rough draft goes, the overview paragraph, you've done the initial paragraph. Purpose, you've written that. Research question, you've done that. Research design, you started, partially done. So this week we're going to work on population, sample, and instrumentation. So those are the new headers. So if you look at this, this is the full list of headers that we're going to use. It's different from the one I initially told you, so I apologize, but I want you to put these in your rough draft thesis. Remember, this is all very rough draft. I haven't approved anybody's study completely yet or anything like that. So when I say done, I mean done for the first draft, and we'll work on it. The total is still going to be 10 to 14 pages. You guys are doing really good with our page goals, and I have no doubt that after explaining your research methodology, you're going to hit this mark. So for research design, you've already talked about your role, so you got that part done. The next couple of things on research design, number 2, you're going to reiterate what kind of study this will be and why the methodology was used based on the research question. So you're going to say, why is it a qualitative? I had this conversation with one of you tonight, and the reason you do a qualitative is because you're really looking at the lived experience or the feedback of individuals that are part of some sort of thing you're examining, observing, or some sort of phenomenon. When you think of qualitative, you think of observation, you think of interview, you think of questions. Those are all qualitative versus looking at raw data and numbers, which would be a quantitative. Basically, everybody in the class has chosen to go the qualitative route. So under qualitative, you have lots of different variations. You can have a case study, you can have narrative, you can have phenomenological. There's lots of different options. For most of you, it fits underneath narrative or phenomenological for this study. The next part of it is what will be used to collect the data. So you need to identify if you're doing a survey or interviews for this. Some may do observation, but basically those are the two that I've come across with most of you. So you're going to talk about how you have access to the individuals that you'll be reaching out to. Don't talk about the population next, because that's the next one. If you're looking at kind of regional data, so if you're looking at something along the lines of, a group of Southeast Asian students in a region, that's definitely something that typically you would do a survey for, unless you want to talk about the lived experience of those individuals. In that case, you would do an interview. So if you're kind of getting broad spectrum data from a lot of sources, you're going to want to pick survey. If you really want to look at the lived experience and feedback of a site-specific trend or program, you're going to be doing interviews. And we'll get into what that looks like in a little bit. So I want you to describe that in those paragraphs. Total should be about 5 to 6 paragraphs for this section, including researcher's role. For the population, this is going to be 3 to 4 paragraphs total. You're going to describe the setting of your study. Where is it taking place? What's the specific site location? Describe the demographics of your study. You can do that in a table form, or you can do that in the form of a paragraph. It's your choice. I would kind of suggest doing it in the form of a paragraph, but basically, what are the type of people that you're dealing with? who's going to participate in this study, and how does your population relate to your research question? In other words, is the specific group that you're talking to related specifically to your research question? Is it going to get your intended outcomes and data? And lastly, you're going to look at sample. So who will participate in the study is kind of an extension of that, and why, and how did these participants align with the question. So, and how are the people accessible? So you're going to basically look at, this is going to be my sample size. This is going to be my sample population. For an interview, I want everybody's goal to be 6 to 7 participants. For surveys, I want 25 or more participants. I've been throwing out the number 40. The more participants in a survey, the more valid and reliable the data is. So I would suggest just getting through IRB and everything like that, that you, well, first of all, everybody definitely has to have a specific sample, who they're targeting and why and how many. But for surveys, if you're doing surveys, the legwork is getting as many participants as possible for reliable data. For interview, the legwork is really going to be on the back end, transcribing and coding. So if you're able to get those, which I think most of you are going to have a pretty good idea of what your population and sample is going to be after we talk in your research design. Most of you that have talked to me tonight, basically you're going to have a good idea. So if you've written those out and you're feeling good, basically I want you to start instrumentation, because this is going to be a real key piece to your IRB process. So this is where you describe your tool and what you'll include. You'll include it in your appendix. So how is the interview or survey designed in accordance with your research questions? So you're going to describe your process for gathering data, or your tool for gathering data. So you're going to describe your survey or your interview questions, and you're going to reveal how that's related to your research question. Again, another warning, you're going to sound repetitive. Don't worry about it. That's the intent. So if you could replace the word repetitive with thorough in your vocabulary, I would much rather have a student over-explain something than have a student who myself, the IRB board, or the Institutional Review Board, thinking, what is going on here? The more that we hear what's going on and why, the better. So it's going to be a little bit repetitive. So we're going to talk about execution this week and next week when we talk, but for now I want you to describe the survey and interview and how it was designed to meet the needs of the study. So just start that first paragraph and see how far you get. I'm going to dissect all of your instrumentation tools, and I'm going to give you real clear feedback on what I need from you. This is where, if you're using something that already exists, some sort of tool that already exists, this would be beneficial and helpful because it's already been vetted. But I'm getting the feeling that most of you were going to be designing something. But the more you can connect it to a pre-existing research-based program or criteria, the better. Case in point, when I was doing my dissertation, I did it on transformational leadership. And so there was a tool basically developed that had 10 characteristics of transformational leadership, and all 10 of the questions I asked were related to those 10 categories. So if there's something in PBIS or MTSS that's kind of like an already set criteria, you could totally base your questions on that specifically. So this will be 4 to 6 paragraphs. So if you take each one of these questions and kind of break it down into a paragraph or two, you'll meet that criteria. So that's going to explain what instrument you're using and why. All right, let's talk a little bit about developing your instrument. So how you build a survey or interview questions. Again, if you can find something that already exists that matches your study, you can use that, but this is how we work developing it. So use something research-based or programmed to reference for your tool. So I mentioned I use the transformational leadership 10 categories. So if you're working in MTSS, PBIS, something like that, something commonly known, use some sort of criteria that's already research-based and established there, and that could help guide you in your categories of questions. or again, use a tool that's already in use. That's a really safe way because it's already been vetted through an IRB process. At this point, you should have already seen some models that you can base yours off of. The more you can look at interviews, surveys, things like that, in different theses, then the better off you are, because you kind of have a goal to pursue. I'll be talking you through it. You're going to develop a real rough draft of a survey or interview questions this week, and I'll give you some feedback. But be looking in some of those theses that you pulled for your lit review. Always reference your research question. Everything has to go back to your research question, or else you're asking questions for no reason. So make sure they align to what you're actually trying to find out through your research. So I'll just use mine as an example. I put transformational leadership. Basically, there was kind of a tool in place, a measurement, but that's not what I used, but I used the categories. So Dr. Larrick and Dr. White came up with 10 categories of transformational leadership. So I based my whole survey off that. So my questions were really similar sounding, but I used the categories. So for one, how have you used visionary leadership to create a culture of success? How did this characteristic lead to higher student achievement? And so I basically asked the same question using a different category of transformational leadership, as you can see here, from communication to political intelligence, creativity, and sustained innovation. I basically just used those categories that they had already pre-existed, and I based my whole interview on that. So the danger if you don't do this is that you can get extremely subjective. And if you don't have real strict categories, you're not going to really get the specific feedback that you want, because remember, you're going to have to code these. So if you're doing a survey, these are a few tips here. Try to find a survey that already exists, but if not, use this scale. So this is your traditional Likert scale here. Gives you some clear data, and you'll align your questions so that they can be answered by these categories, and you can use those numbers. Aim for 10 questions for surveys. Aim for 25 respondents if site-based, if regionally based for 40. It's not super specific criteria. It's just a general rule of thumb. I talked to a student tonight who's probably going to need more than 10 questions, but you definitely don't want to get two more than that, because you want the survey to take less than 5 minutes to answer, because you want them to complete the survey, and you don't want a ton of information that you have to sift through. So that means your 10 to 15 questions have to be very specific and categorized beforehand, so you can make you can analyze good data after that. So those are some general rule of thumbs for surveys. So for interviews, 8 to 10 questions and 6 to 8 participants. I think I said 6 to 7 before. Really, you don't want to get a ton, because you're going to have to code a lot, but you want intercoder reliability. So you want enough, but you don't want too many, and you're going to have to do what we call coding. So if you're doing interviews, a code is a category that is identifiable and comes up in multiple interviews. This is how we see trends. If you're not doing an interview, this is not going to be extremely important to your specific study, but it's good to know how this works. So I sent out a couple videos to go a little bit further into coding, but basically you need some tangible, quantifiable data from this. So the way that you get that in surveys is, once you transcribe all the interviews, which you have to do word for word, you develop categories, different trends, different themes that come up. And you count how many times those come up in each interview. And then you have, strong correlations. So if 6 out of 6 respondents say the same thing, and not only that, they say it multiple times, you have some really strong feedback that in this category, this is really important. Okay, so I have an example here for you in how you can code, or what that looks like. So this is from an old exercise that I did for coding. So basically, You look at this is an example of doing a study on why a person became a teacher. So you can see that in coding, the person writes down which line from the interview it came from, but it talks about how many times. So some of the categories are they had a good role model teacher, they had family who were teachers, they wanted summers off, they wanted the family life, they wanted the same time as kids off, or it worked well for the family. So these are all categories that in some way, shape, or form, the responses could connect to. So basically, you would make categories up like that, and you would look through all the interviews, all the transcriptions, and you would put every time they reference something similar, you would include that in the code. So some of the categories might be, it just came up a few times. Others might be a really strong correlation. So if you were interviewing someone, say, about college preparedness in a rural area, and you're interviewing, candidates for that, they might say things like, we have a really strong partnership with local industry people that help our students get ready for college and career. That may come up over and over and over, and that would be something that you can conclude in your analysis. It's like, hey, this is a big way for rural schools to connect college and career to the students by partnering with these organizations. So that's how you draw conclusions in interviews. It's a scientific, specific way. Sure, if you're doing an interview, it still is a little bit more subjective than a quantitative study, but that is how you make it scientific and tangible for data analysis. So you don't have to code it specifically to every question. You could just code themes overall. And so you take your 10 questions, or your 8 questions, whatever you end up coming up with, and you just basically look for themes that you keep hearing. So basically, in an interview, you're going to record all of them. And that's going to be part of your, your approval with them when you give them the form to verify that they're in, and you tell them what your study's about. You ask if they can be recorded, and you'll record the interview, then you'll transcribe. But when you listen to it and you write it, you're going to see trends, and you're going to mark those as codes that keep coming up. So just taking one question, for example, based off the one I did, you could do code 1, alignment of mission and vision of school, clear goals and vision, clear roles based on clear vision, judgment-free environment, staff respect based on leadership, commitment to success. These are kind of different things that you can mark as codes, just as an example. So let's just talk about the IRB application itself. If you've done all this, once you've done all this stuff, it makes this part a lot easier. We'll start at the top. It's just basic information. So you're going to fill out your information to begin with. Everybody can do this, at least this at this point. So I want you to start filling that out. And then you start going into the questions. It's going to ask you things like, are you submitting to another IRB? Do you agree to comply with the principles discussed in the report? So you'll have to read that report, answer those questions. Number 1. So the first one, you're going to see this really aligns with your methodology that you're writing. But the first one is provide a description of the background and purpose of your research. In this form, it's asking you not to use technical terms and jargon. This should be no more than 350 words, and it could only be a paragraph. So you're just going to give a little bit of background and purpose. The next one, you're going to give a description of your basic research question in your issue. So you're going to list your research question. And you're just going to talk about what you're looking for, your basic research, brief description. Number 3, provide a description of the design and procedure of your research. Be sure to describe all activities that participants will engage in, the total time required. At each step in the procedure that you describe, list all the means you will use to collect the data during that step in the procedure. If your research assistant will support you, describe their responsibilities. You're not going to have that. So basically what you're going to do, let's say if you're doing an interview process, you're going to talk about what your process is for that interview. So you're going to say you're going to contact them, give them a consent form that describes the purpose of your study, the background of your study, have them give you consent. You'll meet with them individually. You will record the interview, ask them the questions directly and nothing else. Once you're complete recording, you'll transcribe the interviews. Once you've transcribed the interviews, you will use a coding method to come up with data and conclusions. So that's basically the gist of what you would do. Now, when you're writing this, you're going to get specific to what your study is when you talk about the interviews. So you could say, I'm going to be asking interviews that discuss the benefits of living on campus at a small private institution versus living off campus, or whatever your research may be. But you're just going to give just some detail on what your study is going to include according to the population that you're going to be asking. The next part of it, after you've done that, you're going to identify which type of study you're doing. So there's going to be a couple of check marks here. So all of you, from what I know, are going to be doing a qualitative, and then you're going to pick one of the more specific ones. Like I said before, I think most of them are going to be narrative, phenomenological, or could be descriptive. But those are the two that I've kind of zeroed in on with you. You're going to indicate whether recruitment or participations will involve the use of any of the following: audio tapes and videotapes, archival data that is publicly available, electronic communication, email or internet. So be honest. If you're going to use those things, most of you are going to use those things. So you're going to be using SurveyMonkey or Google Docs, or you're going to be recording people. So just be honest for what you need for the study. So if your response is yes to any of the items in number 4, you're going to talk about how you'll use these the media. Okay, so you're going to talk about also how you would discard any kind of respondent feedback if need be. So just go into detail what you'll use and what you'll use it for. Number 5 is basically asking you if you're going to deceive your participants in any way. None of you are doing that. Mark no, for sure. Number 6, name any funding for the proposed research. You will not be using any funds as far as I'm aware of. Number 7, benefits. Is there any potential financial professional benefit from the outcome of this study? No. Number 8, has this research been through previous IRB review or anticipated to undergo IRB review or at any other location? No. It's not going to be, the research isn't going to have gone through any IRB. So as far as I know from all of our conversations, that's going to be no on all. The next one is you're going to indicate how many participants that you have included in the study, and indicate the age range of the participants that you're going to enroll in this study. So you will need to do that and base it off our numbers that we're shooting for. Will participants include individuals from any of the following groups? Minors? No. Prisoners? No. Persons with legal guardians or otherwise unable to provide informed consent? No. If you guys were going to do this, you and I would have already talked. That is not the case for this. Next, if you answered yes to any of the items above, describe the methods you will use to provide the special protections. So you won't need to fill this out. Number 11, name and or describe the site, location, organization from which you will recruit or enroll participants. Please attach any permission request letters you intend to send to the sites. This is where we're going to need to do the consent forms. I'm going to work with you folks next week on this individually. But you're going to just describe your site. That's why I've been really directing you guys to be specific in who you're going to be asking. So if you're doing a college, which college? If you're doing a district, which district and which schools within that district. So you're going to narrow that down and be real specific about that. And describe the process you will use to recruit or enroll participants and inform them about their role in the study. Please attach copies of advertisements, flyers, web postings. Basically what we're going to do with this, we'll have a consent form for number 11. And then for number 12, you're just going to have a quick description of your study. as part of that. So that should be pretty straightforward, but you'll attach that and you'll describe how you're going to recruit or reach out to people in your study. After that, for 14, it's a series of pretty easy to decide yes or no questions, so go through that. Number 15, if you answered yes in any of the items of 14, please describe. 15B, please describe the steps you'll take to minimize the risks and ameliorate the impact of any possible harm you have identified above. And 15C for studies greater than minimal risk. So really any of these are not going to apply to you because you're not going to mark yes unless I don't know something on number 14. So basically from here on out, you're going to check how the data will be used. Will you use research assistance? Basically, are you going to use any research assistance? If you're using a confidentiality agreement, complete the form. So that should only be if you're using a research assistant. So for 18, you're going to talk about the steps that you're going to take to make sure that you ensure confidentiality of the participants, how you'll safeguard data that includes identifying or potentially identifying information, indicate when identifiers will be separated or removed from the data. Also indicate where and how you will store the data and how long you'll plan to retain it. So basically, you'll discard the data on completion of the study is the safest way to go. So the informed consent form is something that I had brought up before. Most of the information you've described above must be included in various ways in the informed consent form. So we'll work on that in the space below and include discussion on how you are providing informed consent to participants. If you're not including an informed consent form, explain why. Everyone, we're going to do an informed consent form. There could be some variations of that, but we are going to do it. Discuss, if only if applicable, discuss the use of and process of obtaining any of the following permissions if your research requires this documentation: minor's consent, parental permission, blah, 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 HIPAA authorization. It shouldn't be an issue with any of you. After that, you're just going to declare that you're the principal researcher, and that's pretty straightforward. Okay, so that's the general IRB process. I hope that in going line by line, you feel a little better about it. It shouldn't be too intimidating. I'm going to work with you on the informed consent forms as well as the instrumentation. Just need you guys to get started on the legwork. If you do that, we're going to hit our timeline, going to hit our mark really easily. So for this week, I got 3 items for you. Number 1, I want you to have research design, population, sample, and part of instrumentation done and share with me by next Wednesday. Number 2, write your IRB application rough draft and send the copy to Dr. Daniel. Oops, I wrote my email wrong. drdanielching@gmail.com. You guys know my email. So get that started. And lastly, develop the rough draft of your survey or interview questions, or take an already existing one and send it to me via email by next class. So those are your 3 items to get to me. Okay, so that concludes our session for tonight. I know it was a lot really quickly. I'm hoping that mixed with our conversations that we have tonight give you a real clear picture of what we're doing here. Here's the exciting thing, everybody. We're going to get through IRB, and that may take a little bit of time, but we're going to get through it. While we're waiting, we're going to be prepared so that once IRB goes through, boom, we're going to start our study. And we're going to get through chapter 3. We're going to do it well. And the exciting thing is, by the tail end of this class, the last couple weeks, we'll actually be starting to gather that data and write our chapter 4, which is our data analysis. And then after that, it's the findings. What conclusions did we draw? So it's going to be a lot of fun, and you're going to feel pretty accomplished, and you're going to feel like, hey, I'm a real researcher, and these are the conclusions I came up with. This is how I'm going to help my field. So just conceptualize it. Methodology is just describing your study. You're going to set it up. You're going to set it up for success. We're going to get through IRB. We'll finish out that chapter 3, and we're going to start breaking it down after that. So a lot more to come. Remember, trust the process. Do it piece by piece. Follow the instructions. Try to keep up, and we're going to be fine. I do want to give a shout out to all of you because I know you're balancing a lot right now. The important thing is that in your field work, in your internships, you're soaking everything in. Take the time to enjoy it and really observe. Observe those leaders that you're following. Observe those kids and their behaviors, and really think and reflect on how great it's going to be a school psychologist and counselor, and how you're going to impact the world, because that work, as well as the research that you're doing, is going to make a profound effect. You guys are doing a noble career, and I'm very proud of all of you. So with that being said, we're going to get together on the phone again next week. I'm going to send you out a couple options for us in the near future to do a face-to-face meeting, see which day works, so we can all kind of sit down together and get this thing going. Thanks for being patient, the extra day it took to get this video out, but we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.